So we've got our quorum. Just confirming, President Peterson, would you like to get started here? Would you like to get going?
Yes.
Okay. Just
So hard.
all right. So before I start the recording, just a reminder that we are to keep yourself muted on Zoom. We've got all the gooseneck mics are live now, and to please keep your computer speakers completely off as well. So with that.
Morning. I would love to call to order the work session for June 11th, 2024 retro work session. We are assisting CFO and like, just tonight. Thank you. And I currently use all the opportunities.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Present.
Councillor Lewis. Councillor Nolan. Councillor Rosenthal. Councillor Wong.
Present.
And I think Councillor Gonzalez will be joining us online. And finally, President Peterson.
President, thank you. Would you please lay the safety and enforcement attendees?
Yep. Sorry, technical difficulties. Try.
Down.
Yes, 1 second. Let's see. There we go.
Not only for Jason, I'm the event production manager. We're deploying 5 centers for the arts. Safety is our #1 priority, not only for our guests, but for our staff members. I'm at the Portland 5 centers for the arts here in the Palladium Center. The council chambers are located on the 3rd floor. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room, go down the stairway to the 2nd floor, exit through the main entrance by reception. We gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the reception desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to where it ends. Thank you. Come visit us at Portland 5.
We have one conversation to have today with regional housing funding and chief operating officer recommendation updates. So as you know, we have started a conversation with the region find different ways to solve affordable housing in the middle of an emergency, and the RCO is going to be that to have, and that's an update.
Thank you, President Peterson. Good morning, Council. President Peterson just reminded us all in January, you directed me to conduct a process to explore and choice options for funding for over the past 6 months. Staff
This is not letting me
conducted public opinion research and zeroed in on the viability of expanding uses for housing services tax to fund local. Conversations with our stakeholders and partner counties are ongoing, so I am not going to make a final recommendation to you today. But what I do want to do is share an in-depth update on our progress, illuminating where there is alignment among our stakeholders, and I hope to get your direction in a few aspects of the recommendation that require the process. Much of this will be old news to you, but for the purposes of public transparency, I wanted to provide a full background and context for this conversation, sharing where we've been and what we've heard. As we've explored the question of affordable housing funding, the important elements of the recommendation become clear. I'll share where we have the strongest alignment of thought, values, and opinions from stakeholders and public net partners, and then I'll end up with next steps in the session. We have a couple of questions for you to consider as we go along. I wanted to share them with you for the presentation, so you can be thinking as we go along. So I want to answer any clarifying questions that you have. Want to give you an opportunity to share your feeling alignment, unalignment with the various areas where we know our stakeholders are in agreement. And then checking to see if there are any questions or elements that you would like specifically to be addressed in my recommendation. So.
At points over the last 6 months when the conversation has gotten difficult, one question that tends to come up is why now? Why can't we just wait to see if other sources of affordable housing funding become available? It's a reasonable question, especially in light of the public's lack of trust in government and widespread negative views of our ability to get things done. But the reason there is urgency today is because the housing crisis is worsening. Just at the moment that the region's existing sources of funding for affordable housing are winding down, with Metro's housing bond fully committed this year. The percentage of rent-burdened households is increasing. And if you listen to the news last week, evictions are up in our region. We know that people become homeless for many reasons, but research has shown a clear link between the cost of housing and homelessness. If we do nothing to improve the availability of affordable housing in our region, we risk guaranteeing that our future work will have to be all the way downstream after someone has become homeless. That is a recipe for community suffering that our stakeholders agree must be avoided. We know that housing and homelessness are intricately linked, but historically they have operated as entirely different systems. Until the last several years, when voters in this region identified that capital investments in deeply affordable housing need ongoing investments in services and supports and vice versa. That was the promise of the 2020 SHS measure with its intimate connections to the 2018 bond. Because these aren't different people, both measures are built to serve the same populations, whether they are experiencing the traumas and challenges of chronic homelessness or they are finding themselves suddenly at risk of it. Bond funding creates the units and SHS funds, services, and rent assistance. We're making progress at connecting the dots. For example, 571 permanent supportive housing units have been created that combine Metro or Portland bond funds for capital investments with SHS funding to provide services and rent assistance to the people living in them. But we aren't doing it as effectively as we could if funding were intentionally braided together from the start and supported with long-term funding commitments. Indeed, there's no way that we can meet the 0 to 30% area median income goal for the housing bond without services, and the SHS program can't meet its goals without housing units. The combination of affordable housing and programs like rent vouchers can combine in critical ways to save people from becoming homeless or keep such experiences as brief as possible and help them never happen again. We see that in the stories of thousands of people like those on the slide here, whose stories are among many shared by our excellent housing communications team on the Metro website. That includes stories like Jay on the upper left, who with SHS-funded workforce training from Cultivate Initiatives is now on a community beautification team cleaning up publicly dumped trash in East Portland and East Multnomah County. Cultivate Initiatives also helped him and his girlfriend find an affordable home, which has helped him build stability after 16 years on the street. Or Daisy on the upper right, when her husband had a serious accident, their family suddenly couldn't afford their rent and they moved into their car. They connected with the SHS-funded rapid rehousing program through Join, which was able to get them emergency rent vouchers and find a new apartment, as well as ongoing case management. Or Kathy on the lower right, who was evicted from her apartment when her ill sister died. She would sleep on the street or ride the Max to stay warm, all while struggling to manage her diabetes. Thanks to SHS funding and dedicated outreach, she was able to get into the motel shelter run by Clackamas County and the Father's Heart. Soon, she was enrolled in a regional long-term rent assistance program, and a new case manager at Northwest Family Services found her an apartment she can afford. Or Joyce, on the lower left, who found herself suddenly homeless after losing her job. She told Metro's communications specialist, Lauren Everett, that she didn't have a future, that her life was ending. But after 3 cold nights on the street, she was approached by staff from Do Good Multnomah, who were able to quickly get her into an SHS-funded shelter. Beginning a path with that case management and rent assistance helped her find a home and a stable place to think about what she wants for her future. A home, services, and partners working together have accomplished so much for this life, one of the thousands across the region. There are thousands of stories like this, and together we are making more all the time. Housing and services are not achieving separate goals. They work together to achieve one common goal: housing people. It was outcomes and stories like these that the Metro Council, I believe, had in mind when you gave me direction on January 11th to begin this process with these core values in place. These values have served as strong, durable guideposts to our work, nudging us back in bounds when conversations have drifted off course. Now let's move forward to talk about how staff and I have put these values into action, hearing from a wide variety of stakeholders and members of the public about how to continue to address some of the biggest challenges our communities face. Next slide, please. So this graphic represents all the various channels that staff and I have developed to gather input and inform a recommendation to council. Salud. If it looks like a lot, it is. In applying the values that you outlined, it was important to us to explore multiple dimensions of the question, from community opinion to the technical and financial. I'm going to walk through each one briefly to report out the results at a high level and then share where there's more work to do. Some of you attended one or more sessions of the Affordable Housing Stakeholder Advisory Table. And if you did, you know that we gathered some of the best minds and hearts in the region to help us grapple with how to find a path to affordable housing funding. The Stakeholder Advisory Table, fondly called the SAT because it wouldn't be Metro without an acronym, first defined the stakes, coming to near unanimous agreement that a gap in affordable housing funding would be devastating for the people of the region. Armed with the knowledge of what would happen if Metro was not successful in identifying a future source of funding, the group then navigated a series of exercises designed to illuminate where there was agreement on a path forward and where there was tension or disagreement. Can we advance one slide? Thank you. Sorry about, I know the combined slide is very tiny and hard to read, so these next ones should blow things up a little bit so that you can see. We defined alignment, and we are defining alignment in these conversations, not as unanimity, but a majority or supermajority of stakeholders in agreement on principle. On the question of whether or not to expand the uses of the SHS tax to fund affordable housing, members of the SAT generally agreed that we should, but that alignment came with some sideboards. One, keep the focus on people experiencing chronic homelessness or those at risk of chronic homelessness. Two, make SHS funds more flexible, but maintain commitment to services, aligning nicely with the council's value of stability for existing services. Three, take a look at modest tax relief for payers, but do so cautiously and with an understanding of the impact to services and program goals. And four, there was a strong desire for Metro and the counties to work together on a path forward, and for Metro and the counties to be more transparent and accountable to the region, a sentiment that I found resonated with the Keep Our Promises prong of Metro's strategic framework. Next slide, please. The next path that you see on the graphic is all about listening to our community and to our partners. A conversation this important deserves to be happening all over the region, and that's been the case here, from public opinion research to community engagement. As I mentioned on the previous slide, community engagement is a critical part of this process. We've carried forward themes of prior engagement for the 2018 bond in support of housing services into an engagement partnership with the Coalition of Communities of Color. We have a wealth of deep and broad housing engagement to build from the community-led conversations that informed the 2018 bond and SHS measure frameworks to the community engagement that has shaped the development of every bond-funded project. Recognizing that we were on a very tight timeline for this project, our staff began by compiling themes from the last 6 years of regional housing engagement. Then, to check on these themes and include more community members and perspectives on this conversation, we partnered with the Coalition of Communities of Color to host a series of listening sessions around the region over the last several months. More than a dozen community listening sessions were held in partnership with the organizations. Forward one slide, please. With the organizations that you see on the slide. The Coalition of Communities of Color will be compiling a full report that will be included with my recommendation. But with their permission, I wanted to summarize a few key themes that we've heard so far. Like our engagements with the stakeholder advisory table and housing partners, community members want us to continue to center populations with the greatest need, largely aligning with populations A and B. They recognize the critical link between housing and services and identified that continued investment in affordable housing is critical as a long-term solution to this crisis. Next slide, please. Similarly, they urged us to continue to think about the short and midterm needs of these populations through a spectrum of housing and service investments, including case management, emergency shelter, rental housing, and pathways to homeownership. They want to ensure that any future housing investments reflect community needs, focus on deep affordability, and build a culturally responsive, welcoming, safe, and stable community. Finally, community members participating in this effort have expressed an eagerness to engage directly with government and policymaking processes. Next slide, please. Public opinion research is not a replacement for engagement, nor does it set policy or outcomes, but it is an important check to see if we're in sync with voters' interests and awareness, particularly if we are going to need to ask voters for their support for changes to existing taxes or new taxes. In short, our most recent poll found that 3 in 5 voters support adding affordable housing as an eligible use of the SHS tax, along with maintaining funding for services and rental assistance. Including affordable housing in the question also leads to support for extending the tax beyond 2030, which can create longer-term certainty for the entire system. These results tell me that our conversations are on the right track with voters, although we know that there is still a lot more to work out. In fact, we will be doing additional public opinion research in the coming weeks that is a little more specific to hone in on exactly what the public will or won't support to further refine the recommendation. Next slide, please. So our brilliant housing team is providing us advice and guidance on what possible investments in affordable housing could look like within the bounds of different funding levels, different cash flow scenarios, and different assumptions about populations served. And they're also looking at service demands and acuity levels. It's also important to note that in the system, there are limiting factors outside of Metro's control. For example, the availability of private activity bonds, which really make a difference with those like traditional financing stacks that get very low income housing built. So we are kind of taking all of those components and making sure that whatever the recommendation says that it's practical, going back to the values that you said, and achievable. Next slide, please. One more. Great, thank you. So this slide represents the work that is ongoing through June. We are taking the broad themes collected from our stakeholder advisory table, public opinion research, and community engagement, and reporting that out to existing Metro advisory committees. We're communicating and gathering input from city partners around the region, from city managers to mayors. We're also having positive, productive conversations with our county partners about how we might translate the big themes of our stakeholder engagement into an agreement on a path forward that we can all, Metro, the counties, and stakeholders support. To that end, I want to take a moment here to elevate what we have heard and learned from the counties about the existing implementation of the SHS tax that is relevant to how we apply the council's value of stability of existing services. The original Supportive Housing Services Program was designed to rely heavily on local control and a system in which the 3 counties have 3 individual implementation plans and 3 ways of addressing homelessness that are customized to the unique needs of their part of the region. This is a feature of the system, not a bug, and has some obvious benefits to local communities, but it presents challenges when trying to determine how much is too much or too little funding to set aside for affordable housing construction. Because the counties have 3 different mixes of program expenditures, setting an across-the-board carve-out for affordable housing might work in one county, but undermine existing commitments in another. A solution to this, and one that we are actively discussing with our county partners, is a future state in which counties have the flexibility to determine the mix of spending on affordable housing and services. My team and I think this could be a good solution to the question of how much, if an agreement can be reached on how counties would provide Metro and the public more transparency prospectively and accountability for spending toward shared goals. In our conversations with cities in the region, including city managers and mayors, we are also hearing a call for SHS funding to address gaps in city homeless services across the region. So there's a lot happening in these conversations and a lot of different needs to be met. But I want to make sure that we communicate to you that we are doing our best to listen to our critical partners in this work, and try to be solutions oriented, and focused, ultimately on what will have the most positive impact to the people that we serve collectively. Next slide, please. I'll now transition just to preview some of the key things you'll be seeing in my recommendation, where we're feeling alignment, and a couple of next steps. So next slide, please. Now that you've heard where there's broad alignment among our stakeholders and where there's more work to do, I want to walk you through a couple components you're likely to see in my recommendation. You'll see investments. What are we investing in, how, and for whom? How funding would be allocated, eligible recipients and activities, priority populations. Revenue, my recommendation will include whether or not to refer changes to the SHS tax, whether it's sunset date, its rate, and then we're also we did talk with our stakeholders and are still looking at the concept of recommending a change to the income thresholds to continue to keep it a high income tax. On oversight, as I alluded to earlier, the current SHS system leans heavily in the direction of sending funding to the counties quickly, with Metro and Metro Council's role in a look back or post spending review. Our stakeholders have asked for stronger oversight, regional standardization, and more prospective planning and commitment to outcomes from the counties and Metro. My recommendation is likely to include changes to governance to address this feedback. Additionally, a final section of considerations and next steps will discuss broader questions of housing and services and the issues and dynamics that interact with these issues, identifying potential strategies or follow-up actions to align with the recommendation. Next slide, please. So as I walked through each input channel previously, you likely detected a pattern in the feedback that we got from stakeholders, the public, and our partners. People want this funding to stay true to original promises and to focus on those with the greatest need. They also know that revenue is not unlimited and we need to prioritize the dollars we have, ideally funding a mix of services and funding. I'm hopeful that our continuing conversations with our county partners will be fruitful and provide a mutual path forward to achieve the right balance. Next slide, please. We have heard far and wide that 2030 is coming quickly. Any investment in housing needs longer term certainty, and homelessness will be a challenge that needs continued investment beyond that point. Thus, an extension or elimination of the sunset needs to be considered. And we hear interest in extending it from stakeholders, partners, community members, and public opinion research. But we also hear that we should at the same time address the tax burden, both who pays and what rate is reasonable. We've collected more than we've expected, and we also know that over time that 125,000, 200,000 threshold for families will not be a higher earner tax for long. And we're discussing those issues with our partners. Next slide, please. Most stakeholders and partners have told us our current SHS oversight and governance structure needs improvements. This aligns with findings from a recent audit by our auditor Evans. Although the bond was quite successful, we do have lessons to apply there as well. Particularly if we're expanding an existing funding source to include new uses, we need an integrated, clear structure for oversight and accountability. We need greater clarity of roles, transparency of process and outcomes, and coordination between Metro, the counties, local partners, providers, and community. We also need to have clearer paths to address challenges that arise. No one likes to think that things might go wrong, but we all know they do. Metro needs the tools to take action to correct issues swiftly and efficiently in the future. And again, we are working on all these topics in conversations with our partners now. Next slide, please. So we're just going to talk briefly about next steps in the timeline, just to orient you to where we are. So we are shooting for a July 9th recommendation to you. And part of that conversation will be requesting direction on how to proceed. If the recommendation includes a potential referral to the ballot and the Metro Council agrees with that recommendation, you could at that point direct staff to develop legislation and host a hearing at the July 25th meeting, and then consider taking action to refer August 1st. This timeline would allow you to refer to the November 24 ballot, but is certainly not the only timeline or ballot date that could be considered if you wanted more flexibility. Between now and then, we'll be continuing to do outreach and conversation with our local partners, community and business leaders, hearing feedback and working to address or respond to anything that we hear, or that certainly that you hear if you would like to incorporate that. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking and return to your questions. Next slide, please. Okay. President Peterson, I will kick it back to you.
Thank you, councilors. There's a lot to digest. A lot of work has been done. There's been an array of good conversations narrowing down to this point. So that's amazing. Literally from where we started. So any questions, observations, suggestions? Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. I want to start by acknowledging that there were a lot of meetings and they were long meetings. And we had over 30 participants in each of those meetings, giving of their time and their expertise. And they were here in this room. They were not virtual, which means constituents of mine were adding extra hours of commute time on top of 3.5-hour meetings. It cannot be underscored the importance of the series of engagements and the willingness of some of the highest in demand minds in the region to come to our chamber. So big thank you, and a double big thank you to staff who for every hour of meeting in this room probably had 4 hours of prep meeting and 8 hours of debrief meeting. So well done.
Not more.
Thank you. For me, it's about coming back to who we're serving, and we are serving an incredibly vulnerable population. They're vulnerable in their housing, but they're also vulnerable politically because they're folks who are living on the street, often with mental illness, behavioral addiction, contested family situations, and all of the factors that have been built up by our society that for 100 years has let poverty be a doom spiral down without a hand up. So when I think about going to the ballot, we need to stay centered not only on serving this population, but in a way that doesn't destabilize both the services, but also the identities and rights of these individuals. I am very concerned that we are at a place where the pipeline for deeply affordable and PSH units is going to go away. I thank you for centering us on that. I would like to see us hear what the future state is if we do nothing, because I do not think that it has been particularly well developed that there is no future state of deeply affordable units. Those are the units you can get with a voucher. Those are the units that pair with permanent supportive housing. I'm also deeply concerned that we've had multiple mayors be part of this process, multiple city electeds listen in, and part of their feedback is that this broadly just isn't working right now. We have obviously a large city and a large county that have a level of coordination, and we can all read in the newspaper how functional or dysfunctional it is. But we have 23 other cities and 2 other counties, and their level of function or dysfunction is more unknown, but just as dire. So I would like for us to make sure that as we are moving forward with the 3 counties as our partners in this work, we don't forget that this is an urban service and cities have a valuable voice. And then last, I feel like there has been a turn in which people agree that 2030 is so soon, and not only is it so soon in political sense, it's soon in the lives of people that we are trying to help. And if we have vouchers that these folks are planning and relying on, it would be irresponsible of us to not immediately start planning for how to continue rental stability for the folks that we've placed and supported in housing. Those are reflections. Those aren't questions.
Thank you.
Other reflections or suggestions? Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Nolan.
I have more questions. I'm still absorbing not just the information here, but the accumulation of information and worries and possibilities that are being collected. How much of your recommendation is already established? Are there things you've already settled on? And if so, I'd like not to have to guess what they are. I'd rather have a sense of, given all this process, all this information, all this analysis, I'm most likely to move forward with these, and these are ones that I'm still thinking about or we're still evaluating.
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. That's a fair question. And I think I guess I would describe it a little differently. So, I believe that we have broad alignment and agreement on principle with our stakeholders and our stakeholder community. And so those high level areas of alignment that I shared with you that were consistent from the stakeholder advisory table to the public opinion polling to our community partners, that it's a good idea to try to find a way to expand uses of the SHS funds for affordable housing. I think everyone can get there on principle. The challenge is the devil is in the details. And what does that actually look like? How do you do it in a way that doesn't undermine the system, that doesn't disturb the stability? And stability is an interesting word because this is still a new program that was birthed into the pandemic. So, is it currently stable? No, but you also don't, this question would be very different if we were just starting from scratch. We have to consider the existing system that we're trying to double dutch into. So I have a hard time seeing my recommendation not including some change to SHS to include it to be used for affordable housing because the community is there. My favorite quote from one of these stakeholder advisory tables was, if we can't figure out how to do this, there's something wrong with us. It was like the money quote from the whole thing because, and it came from someone who is a service and housing provider, someone who, has dedicated their career to these populations, to making a difference, to integrating services and housing. And so it was a credible, it wasn't just, a scream into the wind. So I think there's alignment on principle there, and the work that remains to be done is just the details of how. And I think it's really important to me in applying the values that you've given us to guide this process, to do everything that we can to make sure that the counties can implement whatever we're doing, and that we're not undermining the progress that they've made and the work that they've put into it. And so that's why, I shared with you, one solution to that would be to have the counties tell us what it would look like, what that mix of, or that spectrum from, outreach to shelter to housing would look like in their counties. Share with us the outcomes that they expect to get over a period of time. Pardon me?
Haven't they already done that with their LIPs?
Well, their LIPs are right now just for SHS and only what
Okay.
SHS can currently provide. So I think that there's some merit to that concept, and but I believe that it also hinges on governance. How can we respond to the feedback that we've gotten that our outcomes for these programs are not clear and not transparent, that, folks are not sure. For example, the original measure required that 75% of funding be spent on the chronically homeless, population A, and 25% on population B, which is, folks at risk of homelessness. And I think people don't have faith, and it's difficult for us to say that that is currently happening. And so, and there's evidence that it is not. And so that is a major issue that needs to be addressed, whether or not we make changes. But this is an opportunity. Refer changes to the ballot, but this is an opportunity to kind of pull together an entire package of reforms.
If I could follow up. Once upon a time in my life, I was a commercial banker, and banks are subject to something called a stress test, where regulators come in and push on things that could go wrong. So as a member of the team, I'm going to ask stress test questions. I like the idea that if we can't figure it out, there's something wrong with us, but we've been trying to figure this out for 25 years. Different players, but the organizations haven't changed. We still have 3 counties. There are still 24 cities. There are still a variety of CDCs and other service providers. What are your criteria for busting up what we've been doing? Because it hasn't been working. And smart people have been in those rooms. We don't have them not, the current people who are admittedly very smart about this, very passionate and committed, probably not really smarter or more committed than people who've tried to tackle it before. So we have to, what that tells me is we have to do something, at least in some places, that is fundamentally different, or we will get the same outcome of 10 years from now, people saying, what the hell?
Mm-hmm.
What would you include that changes things and maybe makes us on Metro uncomfortable, maybe makes our partners at the cities a bit uncomfortable because they're not used to doing it?
Well, I think it's important to note that I think that the dysfunction of the system the last 25 years is a very different question than what we have today. Because, as somebody who worked at Multnomah County for a decade and a half, the system was chronically underfunded. And so when you have a chronically underfunded system that is charged with literally saving people's lives, every spare dollar is going to go to getting people off the street, getting someone to stay alive. It's not going to strategic planning. It's not going to organizational development. It's not going to things that would create and develop a strong system. We now, and then we got all this funding from the public. And we poured that money into a system that the existing system couldn't receive it. I think they have come a long way over the last few years of improving things, but there's a lot of progress yet to be made. But I make that distinction because it's a different operating environment when you have funding than when you don't. I think to me, the most important thing is having clear expectation for Metro. And now I'm going to narrow in from the big system to Metro's relationship to SHS and affordable housing. Having clear regional standards, clear shared definitions. And this is fundamentally about a relationship between us, our partners in the community. Any relationship needs clear expectations, shared definitions, a well-defined two-way street of we're going to give you this, and in return, you are going to do this. And then we track that over time. I think those are kind of fundamental things that we don't have. We have high-level LIPs. We have a system in which it's sometimes a year before you, the Metro Council, review the expenditures that happened a year ago. That is not sufficient to, rapidly respond to, needs and corrections. So upfront planning, clear outcomes, specifics, better data, standardization, clear definitions, better communication. I think that is, it sounds simple. It's not. It never is in practice, but that's what we need to do collectively. Whether or not we make changes to the measure, that's the area that I would focus on and that I've seen needs the most work as we have implemented this program.
Can we move on? And
Just
back?
quick, and then I'll
Okay.
get back in the end of the queue. I understand that we have to be smart about how we're doing things. Measure twice, cut once. I get that. I have not looked at every single detail and crosstab on the public opinion research, but I have a hard time imagining we can sell to the voters, if there's any opposition, that we need a longer time to do planning and act like grown-ups. I'm oversimplifying your statement, but that's what I'm hearing, and I think I'm channeling other voters. So I don't need an answer in the moment, but I think we have to really stress this and think about how it plays. Yes, we've done some public opinion research, but think about how it is absorbed on the kitchen tables of people who are voting in a historically disruptive election, which is the one we're looking at putting this on the ballot for, and where half the population in the region is voting on a brand spanking new system of voting that will take their attention. I need to be convinced that we have stressed it and that we've got answers for when things go wrong, because you're right, they will.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Wong and then Simpson.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Marisa and the staff for all the hard work. I think from all the conversations, I've been having with stakeholders, everyone has said this has been, Metro at its finest, convening an inclusive process and having these conversations. And yeah, I think that's to be commended. We love our process here in the Portland Metro region. And I'm wondering how you know, this recommendation might help us kind of build upon that momentum, but also, you know, cut through some of the process that kind of binds us in many ways. Like when I first started on council and I was learning about SHS a couple years ago, I think I counted 7 different bodies that touch upon policy making. So we have 3 counties, you know, City of Portland, Tri-County Planning Committee, Oversight Committee, and then the council. And I think one of the biggest reasons why we're here having this conversation is, you know, the inability of the system to course correct in any like efficient or meaningful way, because we have so many stakeholders that have a say. So, you know, when a stakeholder comes to us with an issue, they'll come to somebody like, no, that's not our decision. That decision is being made somewhere else. So there's this constant process of someone else's, you know, policy or change that needs to be made. And I think that's one of the hardest things in this process is like, you know, there's a lot of metrics that we can have around production or, you know, folks being housed, but like how we bring folks together to make shared decisions is probably the most challenging thing that we can get people to agree on. And I'm wondering if you could speak more about how we could streamline that decision making and, you know, increase transparency and accountability. And I think that probably means less bodies that are more empowered, but I want to understand kind of like what your thinking approach might be, so that we're all not all pointing fingers at each other when, you know, things aren't working as planned.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Councillor Wong. I think what you're raising was also elevated in the audit of the SHS program, which is that the governance, it's multi-layered, it can be circular, the roles are ambiguous, and at the end of the day, I believe that causes just a lot more work and without a lot of benefit to be seen from it. So, you know, my recommendation is likely to include recommended changes to streamline that process, to reduce the number of committees, to make the process more linear. So with, you know, a clear pathway from the folks who are providing and implementing the program through a body that is charged with overseeing and making recommendations to the Metro Council. So, you know, really trying to be clear about what role people play in the system, what their responsibilities are, and what their responsibilities aren't. I think another way to improve the system would be to increase the independence of that oversight body. So be very clear about conflicts and roles. It needs to have expertise, but I think we need to do our best to find people who, for that role, and for any oversight role, this isn't just for SHS, but for any committee, to be really clear about conflicts. So I think having also having a clear linear process with independence and separation between the layers is something that starts to build credibility and trust with the public, because you can explain it, it makes sense. It's not the fox guarding the hen house. And I'm not disparaging the individuals in the existing system. You know, this was a groundbreaking program with a lot of attempts to include people. And I think the folks who created this should be commended. And I think we're at a point a couple years in where we are seeing where improvements could be made, and we should take the opportunity to do that.
Thank you. If I just might close that line of thought, you know, a lot of us, especially in elected positions, are held accountable, and rightfully so, for the outcomes. And I think what you're hearing across the region from many electeds, local mayors, councilmen, or council people, excuse me, and, you know, county commissioners, is that they don't have a ton of input or say. And that, you know, we're all being held accountable, you know, by our constituents, which is absolutely right. But like, I think there needs to be some calibration where we as electeds all across the region have some ability to shape and guide that conversation more than we do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Counselor Simpson, you were actually up and then you lowered your hand, so go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Thank you, President Peterson. Thank you, COO Madrigal, for your work on this. I know I'm gonna uplift a lot of what my colleagues said and not sit on it, but to all those folks who you know, showed up to make this thing happen and this conversation, push it forward. Thank you, because this is a tough one, obviously. So thank you, Marisa. I want to bring up our conversation we had last week during our Q2 meeting with the East County city managers. They expressed a number of concerns about their engagement and communication with Multnomah County and the joint office. How do you see your recommendations improving the ability of our smaller jurisdictions to effectively address homelessness through your current recommendations? Because, you know, it was something to hear. I think we spent about a good 50% of our meeting on just this topic. So I'd be happy to hear that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Counselor Simpson. So in my conversations with city managers, and I think with conversations with elected mayors as well, there are both cities that are working well with counties and receiving funding and feeling that, you know, their needs are being addressed and considered. And there are also cities that feel that, you know, there's all this funding and they are still struggling to stock their food pantries. And so I think what I have shared with my counterparts at the counties is that whatever we do moving forward has to meaningfully address the concerns of the cities in our region, that the jurisdictions, you know, are ground zero for things that happen in community. And so while I don't have today, you know, a specific solution, I can tell you the values that I'm bringing to that table is that cities are also critical partners, and we have to solve for that in any recommendation going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because I feel like, you know, during our conversations, you know, they really expressed like the way it's currently structured, it's not working. And they've, you know, made numerous requests. And I just want to make sure it's structured in a way where we're not only listening to how they respond and their plans, but also like their budgets. Because, you know, I think one of the things is, I think a lot of these smaller jurisdictions ask for an amount and they get a different amount that is lesser than what they need to actually do the work on the ground. And that also slows down the work. And to Councilor Wong's point, that continues to, you know, really irk off our constituents. And so I just want to be mindful that like our smaller jurisdictions are really pressing for help. And I think that like by showing up for them through these recommendations and restructuring would benefit us greatly. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Before we go back around the table, I'd like to just weigh in. Thank you, Marisa, for all the work to get to this point, and all the staff in all of the jurisdictions, including Metro, and all of the electeds and stakeholders. I can't, this is an issue that's actually much bigger in our state than just SHS, Supportive Housing Service Measure, and greater than the existing federal and state programs that we have. It's a bigger issue than that. And it's about our economic development. It's about how we get folks to work. It's about our educational system. There's a lot of systematic problems within the state that have led to this problem. We are not going to solve all of it. And so being able to do more with the money that we are receiving, and possibly looking at a tax rate reduction for those who are helping us solve this problem, I think is huge. I think that it was the right call at this point, and I am in agreement with a lot of the things that you've laid off. So I just wanted to kind of say you hit the major themes for me personally. And I also want to say that we were the first with this literally national crisis to have both an affordable housing and a supportive housing services regional program that we created. So kudos to us, but there's no need that those have to be separate. And other places have already put out on the ballot and have won those, like King County, to be able to do it. And King County is about the same size as this region. And it's only one of the many counties in the Puget Sound, but they put it out and they have tied the two together in their funding stream. So I feel like this is doable. It's hard to start thinking about it differently because we started from a different place, but I think it is obviously doable. And I commend everybody for figuring out how to midstream, even though it feels disruptive. That's actually why Metro was created, to do disruption when things are not working the way that they could. It's a good governance model. It's a good governance conversation that we're having. We had very little time to put the ballot measure together. And it shows that we are in a continuous learning mode and we want to do better. So I think all of this is the right foundation. I guess what I also want to say is that getting back to some of the conversations about outcomes, I think we all recognize that we can continuously get better at the outcomes as we grow these programs. And I want to commend the counties for running hard in a time period when people were leaving jobs and not wanting to come back because they were burned out during COVID, and changes to how people are managed. And this has been a lot. But what we haven't ever had in this space, because Metro wasn't really a part of it and it was based on individual counties working with state and federal folks, is we've never had regional goals. And I think that's really what's missing here. Is you can have a county plan that is county specific. And we do this with every other part of all of our programs. We have regional goals, and then you are allowed, and it's been the best way for us to work with our cities and counties, whether that's on setbacks or development from stream corridors. What was the outcome we're trying to get to? We were trying to get to clean streams, bring back the salmon, that sort of thing. But we allowed every jurisdiction to come up with their own plan to achieve that. And if they are not, then you have a conversation. We did not have time to create those regional goals and get consensus on those regional goals. I think it is time that we actually start creating those, and it has to be part of the program moving forward. Yes, you can have your own individual county plan that helps you target the specific populations, but it needs to show that you're moving in the direction of the region solving homelessness and the region having enough affordable housing in order to do that. And supportive housing service money is not the only money. And again, if we're not able to tell how we're meeting regional goals with all of the money in the system, we are doing a disservice to being able to tell the story of actually being successful and finding out where the trend lines are going for the entirety of the region and all of the money coming in. So the data sharing for regional tracking is something that needs to change, whether or not we go out to the ballot for this. And you already said that, but I just want to put a bigger plug in there. We have also all heard from the cities that there's different methodologies, and we need to standardize that for how cities are dealt with within this process, because the counties are not the only ones working on this issue. And it does differ between. And I just want to say again, personally, one of the big things going into this for me, since we are projecting to take in a lot more money than we had originally told the voters, is that we do look at that tax rate reduction while not disrupting and still meeting the needs, because we said it was a $250 million a year program. Yes, inflation. Yes, to understanding some of the nuances of that, but the amount that we would be bringing at the end is so much more, and we have so much in the bank yet to spend. Maybe it is planned to be spent, but it has not been spent yet. And so I think we need to really, really make sure that when we go to the ballot, that we are listening to all of the stakeholders in this region. Not just the city of Portland has been showing us at the ballot that they are very concerned about their tax burden. So I think we just need to keep that in mind. I think also you know, just for one example, from Washington County in their last work session, a lot of the themes that you hit on show that you have heard our stakeholders who are actually implementing this. They had 4 guiding principles that they talked about. Keep the focus on the original SHS goals. And that was to end chronic homelessness and no net increase in the inflow of homelessness from their viewpoint. And I think where we're headed is to be able to do that with the even more emphasis, because again, the two are reliant on each other. Continue relying on local expertise and ensuring local control to invest the funds. Again, I think you've heard that and agree. I just would like to overlay, we need regional goals to know that we're actually moving as a region in the right direction with coordination and partnership. The system needs to be flexible over time. I think we've heard that we need more flexibility, but we also on the backside with more flexibility means more accountability. So I think you've heard both those things. And then the last one Washington County talked about was no change to flow funds for ongoing services or operations or change in distribution of SHS. And I think what we're really talking about here is not undermining already existing contracts, undermining already existing programs. So I think for me, just with, you know, one of our stakeholders, one of our main implementers who's doing a great job. I think we are certainly hearing all of those things, along with the cities who definitely have been working to achieve some output. So again, those are my observations. I would just ask us to think about how we include setting regional goals that the LIPs would then be aiming towards.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, we'll go once more around the horn. Councilor Lewis and then Nolan.
Sure, thank you so much. I think that we're in a particularly interesting period because we are hearing and lifting up stories from each of the 3 counties, as we did in this very presentation, about people who have found success in permanent housing with the supports around them, only because of this measure. So how do we make those voices shine through, amplify, put a megaphone in front of that work while also saying, we're in a dysfunctional relationship and we need to come through this period of marriage counseling, still holding hands, but with some new definitions and some new tools. And for me, I guess a question regarding your proposed timeline in July. Might you consider coming with multiple flights of recommendations, including those that could happen sooner, that may not require voter approval? Even if we're kind of right on the edge and some of those might be taking on different risks, I would love to at least contemplate sooner action than a referral and passage and implementation would require.
It's a great question. We have definitely been discussing what are elements of a recommendation that would be for a referral, and then what are other bodies of work that need to or can be done, whether or not that happens. So kind of separating those out. And I think we will be including some elements like that. And I would say, you know, governance is one that sort of we know from our audits that no matter what, we have to address it. We may be able to address it in a big way through a ballot measure, but I think that there are also other things that we could do today or July 25th, after I speak to you, to move things forward. So we'll try to sort of tease those things out. And I think some of those things that don't belong in a ballot measure will also require more conversation with our partners, because, you know, we do want to make sure that what we're setting up works better for all of us and not just for Metro.
Thank you. I look forward to hopefully seeing what we can do right away, while understanding that the end game of using these monies in a flexible way to build permanent housing will require the voters at some point telling us something different.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I could just say with that, would love a, just because my mind may not have gone to the same place, Councilor Lewis, when you said that, but a risk analysis, a legal risk analysis. I wouldn't want whatever I put to the ballot to be overshadowed by something that we didn't have complete consensus on and somebody
Mhm.
challenges us.
Yeah, we definitely plan to include, so I kind of glossed over it in the presentation, but when we talk about alignment, you know, it's not unanimity. And I think that it's important for council to know where there's areas of agreement and also disagreement. And so, you know, for each area that we explored, for example, at the stakeholder advisory table, you know, in a room full of 30 smart, very diverse people, you know, there were often, you know, there was often a minority of folks who were out of alignment with where the rest of the group was, and for, you know, their own you know, legit reasons. And so having we plan to speak to that in the report and include that just so that you can hear the alternate perspectives.
Thank you. Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Madam President. Thanks, Marisa. I like the conversation we're having here about goals. Clarity of process is sort of inside the building kinds of conversations. Benefits to the populations who are most in need, and also to the community at large, because homelessness affects the lives and livelihoods of people who are housed. How many fewer people will be unhoused in 5 years? If what I'd like to know what you have in your mind about how many fewer people would be unhoused, or what are we trying to accomplish, and then build the proposal around that target. We're good at measuring widgets, and I categorize in widgets even housing units, which are a mechanism for making sure people have homes with 4 walls. But we could succeed, as we have with the housing bond, on building units exceeding our target, but not moving the dial on the number of people or families who are living unhoused.
That's right.
And I think I'm representing my constituents who want to see that the answer will eventually be 0. And maybe we can say, we want it to be 0, and here's the kind of timeline it takes to get to 0, and here's the kind of funding it takes to get to 0. And backing out from that, here's what we should ask the voters to adjust. So I would like to ask to have that presented, ideally as guiding what you recommend. If not as guiding it, then as measuring whether it's adequate to the goal. And I would put out there, I am not sold yet that it is good policy or good humanitarianism for us to reduce the resources available to this effort. So if you make a recommendation to do that, I would like to see, if our target is functional 0, and without changing the tax system within the mechanism, we can get there in X years. But if we do reduce the tax rate by Y%, it'll take us X plus 5 or however much. It would help me to see your staff's analysis of what would happen in real lives. And all of our lives are real, but I'm most concerned about the folks who are living without a roof over their heads. So that I could, and I hope it would be useful for my colleagues too, say, okay, it's more urgent and I'm willing to continue the rate and maybe have some future mechanism where we say, okay, now we've reached stasis and we could move to a lower level, but we're still in crisis. And let's get to functional zero and then talk about adjustments so that we have a choice. Okay, 0 in 10 years, 0 in 12 years at current rates, 0 in 25 years if we reduce the rate. Which do we want to do?
So we have a brilliant team of folks who can tell me, can tell you, if you have this much money and you make these assumptions about the level of acuity and income of people that you want to serve, you can house X many people in X number of units with this much money. Like, we can answer literally 31 flavors of that, depending on the assumptions that you make. And we have done a lot of those scenarios. We've produced a lot of those scenarios for the stakeholder advisory table. We've produced them for conversations with counties and other partners. I think if we explore the idea of giving the counties the flexibility, affordable housing is another tool in their toolbox. I think we do need a goal like what you're talking about. Like, we want to serve and house X number of people. And then the counties will say, you're shaking your head, but I'm going to keep going and you can tell me why.
It's not what I'm saying. It
Oh,
may be
okay.
what you're saying. I'm not saying let's house so many people.
Okay. But okay. If you
I'm
want to
saying
end homelessness for a number of people.
Let's do what it takes
Mhm.
so that the people living outside are essentially down to the minimum, that there isn't any chronic homelessness anymore. People might fall into that, but they move out of it within 6 months.
Mhm.
That we get to zero where, and that does, I'll acknowledge, it means we keep people out of falling into homelessness, which we're already doing. It isn't how many units we build, because that doesn't tell us how few people are living on the street.
I see what you're saying. And I think, again, in a future state where the counties have flexibility and affordable housing is a tool, they would decide what mix they need. And I'll give you an example. In Clackamas County, they are housing people with vouchers. They are having success with that. They, are achieving a goal. They are achieving their goals without construction. And so I think we need to think carefully about what goal we would be setting in a regional plan. I would caution us against saying that this funding is going to end anything, because the inflow of people is impacted by a lot of forces outside of our control. And, that is not, I'm not trying to give a bureaucratic answer. I'm trying to be a pragmatist, and not make promises that we can't deliver on. This is a lot of money and it can do a lot of good. But if we have another pandemic, if we have the next fentanyl, if we have, we can be driving toward a goal to make homelessness rare and as short as possible. But the inflow into our region is in many ways outside of our control.
And our UGB report says that there's not going to be much of it. So we have to be consistent from one department to
I think
another.
you meant fentanyl and those sort of things, not
Fentanyl.
as
We
issues that are
react to
out
the
of our
real
control.
world. This
Yeah.
shouldn't be any different.
Well, and also this funding is a portion of the overall funding and it can't be used. I would be hesitant
Be
to,
bold. We need
I-
to be bold if we're going to convince the voters to do anything different.
I would also be careful that we don't let our state and federal partners off the hook for actually doing the job that they need to be doing. We can't lift up everybody under just one of our measures. So I think this is the hardest nut to crack. Is why it hasn't been done yet, right? I think we're all in agreement of generally what you're saying.
It's okay for us to disagree. We're
No,
not in
I'm
agreement.
I'm just trying to say that the parameters need to be carefully weighed of what we are trying to, like, is this funding there to end chronic homelessness by itself? No, it was set up to do it with everything else, right? So I'm gonna move on to Counselor Rosenthal and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have really a lot to add. We knew this was not going to be an easy process when we started. Perhaps it's been a bit more of a Herculean task than we anticipated, but I appreciate all the efforts that staff has made. I suspect sometimes they think it's a Sisyphean task, but I think we are moving the ball forward. I think we are being successful. And so I appreciate all the efforts they have done. I generally concur with the comments made by the chair, with the exception that I think we have had regional goals. We just haven't been very clear in continuing to put these forward and to remind people that we started out with regional goals. We started out with the 25-75. We started out with the regional goal of eliminating chronic homelessness. We could have been a little clearer, and we maybe have not been quite as persistent in mentioning these. And so perhaps we need to articulate them again. So I see the program and I see it through the eyes of the local cities that I represent as being a partial success, but something that is complicated and something that we're working on. I think we have to keep going.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Lewis, do you want to?
I just want to say a couple things, not because I think it's going to solve things that could make things more complicated. Nationally in our country, the fight over affordable housing is not over how do we build affordable housing, how do we manage affordable housing. It is over who is deserving of this particular unit and in what order are we going to house people, and which people are always at the back of the line and which people are always at the front of the line. And this is the first time that we've moved forward as a region saying there is no back of the line. We are going all the way down, and everybody, no matter, you come into homelessness with your own individual journey and your own individual story. Much of it is systemic failures compounding upon each other, but maybe some of it is some individual choice or some things that you did that you wish you hadn't done, or we wish you hadn't done. But no matter where you are in that line, this measure is going to provide resources to bring you into housing, bring you into stability. And I think that maybe the place that we're at tension, where we can't decide if we agree or disagree, is where our brain literally breaks about thinking about a policy that is so universal that if you are living on the street in the city, it does not matter how you got there or why, and it does not matter the amount of resources it's going to take to get you out. We are always prioritizing what is expedient and what is comfortable. And we have to get to the point where we're not.
Thank you. Nicely said. And difficult.
Yeah. And bold. I like it.
All right. I think you've heard from all of us. Thank you
Thank you.
again for all of the work. Thank you for everybody who was working in the background to get us to this point. We look forward to you coming back with a recommendation. that also has some of the trade-offs and some other ways to maybe look at it if we so choose. And that will be in July.
Thank you.
So thank you. Do you have any other updates for us?
That's my big one.
Okay. One big one.
Thank you.
Counselor Communications, anything to share? Counselor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to take a moment to thank Councilor Rosenthal, Mayors Minor and Kurtna for coming and joining me yesterday for a tour of the new Blue Lake. Still not quite ready yet, but very promising, super promising. And it was a joy to see both of those guys just look at the investment that Metro is making into that park that has become such a gem, as Mayor Kurtna said. He says nobody can point out what Fairview is or where it's at, but they know Blue Lake. And he's like, well, that's Fairview. So kudos to John and Susie and the team for their work that they're doing out there. And just when it opens, y'all, we got to get out there and go have a good time because it is nice.
Awesome. Thank
Thank
you. Counselors, any other updates? Counselor Rosenthal.
Yeah, I just want to shout out to our team, our parks team, for the work that they're doing, an extensive restoration project in Wilsonville on the Coffee Creek wetlands. It's quite a undertaking. They're revising the hydrology, they're increasing habitat, they're trying to get rid of nasty invasives. It's a big project and it's being done with the cooperation and full support of the city of Wilsonville. So looking forward to a whole swath of natural areas that the people out there can enjoy and we can all enjoy.
Great, thank you. All right, counselors, seeing no further hands up, our next regular scheduled meeting is Thursday, June 13th, 2024 at 10:30 a.m. As I remember, we've got a bunch of budget stuff coming up. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.